This is not your typical racing podcast intro, but don't you worry, you are going to get it in a bit, namely once the conversation that I had with Chase and JP starts. But I wanted to keep you updated and close the storyline of the monuments of gravel. You maybe heard Paul and myself discuss this list a few weeks ago, back when it was the preliminary list that I had. In the meantime, I then went on to publish the final Monuments of Gravel list over on the Gravel Stack newsletter. By the way, if you're not yet a subscriber, I'd be super stoked if you would jump to thegravelstack.substack.com or simply click on the link in the show notes and subscribe/follow the newsletter. And as I said, a lot of thinking, a lot of discussions and comparisons went into the final list, and I wanted to at least keep you in the loop of what I ended up on as the 2025 edition, first edition of the Monuments of Gravel. As I said multiple times, that is not a static list that will stand for all times, because we're just in this super dynamic environment currently in gravel, and more races will elevate in status and so on and so forth. But we need to start somewhere, and let me tell you where I ended up on so far. And actually, before going into the 5 monuments, because obviously we cannot have more gravel than road monuments, so 5 is the limit that I ended up deciding. I also have a few honorable mentions in the article over on the newsletter. And you will find 2 names on there that were still in the preliminary list back when I talked to Paul. And the first one is SBT. So Steamboat didn't get monument status in the end. The reason for it is the history of the race, or the lack thereof. Because when it all came down to it, with its foundation in 2019, it is, especially by US gravel race standards, still a rather young race. And even though it brings all the ingredients of a monument, the race that ended up replacing it has more history, and that is why SBT just didn't make the cut. It's a very close call, and we can argue about it happily. So let me know what your take is. Jump over on Instagram or leave a comment on Substack if you disagree. But it is just in the honorable mention category this time around. The second race that personally pains me as well to not have as a monument is Badlands. If you remember, Paul made the case that it shouldn't be on the list, and he specifically said, look, there are just not enough hitters in the race in the last years, and he also argued that it is probably decreasing a bit in relevance. I didn't fully agree with him back then, but I checked, and I also ended up having to accept the fact that the start list in the last years was not deep enough, not hitter coded enough to justify monument status when it all came down to it. And that pains me. For one, I mean, I told a few times the story of how Badlands is definitely very influential in my own gravel journey. It's a list that is it's a race that is definitely on my bucket list. I want to do it one day. But even more so, I believe that ultra racing is so important in the context of gravel that it should be on the list, that one monument should represent this discipline or genre within gravel. And I think Badlands has the best case of all the ultra races that are still in the in the category of races you can do without sleeping, because then I think there is a certain cutoff point where then Tour Divide and all the other super long distance races, that is also different riders, competitors. But in this distance and duration level, we still have a fair amount of crossover on the athlete side. And yeah, just the start list hasn't been deep enough in recent years. The Lachlan Morton win is a few years ago by now, and while very good people win it, depth is a key criteria here. And so, yeah, I just couldn't give it to it, which pains me. But again, hard decisions have to be made if you only have 5 slots available. Other honorable mentions: Mid-South, Big Sugar, and the Grellock. To be fair, of these 3, the Grellock has the weakest case to be a monument. It already automatically gets cut off because of its age. But I just wanted to give a shout out and some consideration to a race in the UCI calendar as well. And I think between all the races on the UCI list, the Grellock has the best case, because not only is it super scenic, it also has its own brand and reputation. They are trying to build something that doesn't live only off the UCI logo attached to the race name, which, to be fair, a few races try, but they are just making a really good job at it. They do an entire weekend, there is camping and so on. So yeah, it's a proper gravel-coded event, so a shout out to them. But now let's talk you through the 5. And what I ended up doing is I created sub-tiers in the monuments category. There are obvious choices, and the tier is named accordingly, the obvious choices, which are Unbound and the Trucker. I guess we don't even need to discuss it. I did in the episode with Paul. Listen back to it. But yeah, that is the 2 very obvious monuments that everybody who would assemble such a list would definitely have on there. Now, the second tier within the monuments I called still an easy pick, because if you consider all the criteria, if you recall, it's how deep is the field, how is the brand, what is the media awareness, is it changing or altering careers. Lauf Gravel Worlds, formerly known as Garmin Gravel Worlds, definitely has a very good case based on all this, including its history, its grassroots origins, the fact that now it has joined the Gravel Earth Series as a plus 20% race. Taking all this into account, I think it's an easy choice to be on there. And then we have the close air calls. Closer. Paul, if you remember, made a case for the Rift, and it ended up on the list. Thanks to his case, thanks to a bit more research, and to me, the main objection I had to it initially, or the main reason why I didn't have it on my preliminary list, was the strength of the field in the race. Because on all the other sides, like, it is old enough, it is very iconic, it has a great reputation. Like, if you even last year heard US pros talk about European races, the Rift was always one that they mentioned. So it is very well known. The coverage, the photos, the video you get from there, it stands out. You can see the Rift picture and you know exactly which race it is, just because the lava volcanic landscape over there is very trademarky. And then I went to look in detail at the start lists of the last editions, and while top US pros don't tend to be there, or there is one or two maybe in the women's and men's field, on the European side, I realized, oh no, there is usually a very strong competition. That was still true in this year's edition, which happened after I released the list, but it ended up in there. And then the one final monument edition that I didn't even have on the preliminary list, just as an honorable mention back when I talked to Paul, is BWR California. I did elevate it on the monuments list based on merits, history, recognizability of the BWR Belgian waffle ride brand. And I, of course, looked at all the criteria, and I even say in the piece that I wrote about it that it is mostly the BWR brand. Plus, of course, the history of BWR California as the first BWR race out there with historically very big and very strong start fields. And the key reason against it is the smaller and smaller start list with less and less hitters. But I think there is a explanation for this, which ended up convincing me that for now, BWR needs to be represented on the list, and California, of course, is the BWR race. And I think calendar position had a lot to do with the field this year that was very small compared to prior editions. And it's because the trucker was just 1 week later, and with that, many pros decided to not do BWR California. And if that can be resolved, I'm also fairly confident that more racers will again go to and target BWR California. So, where does it leave us? It leaves us as a list of 5 monuments: Unbound, the Trucker, Lauf Gravel Worlds, the Rift, and BWR California. As I said, there are obvious and less obvious cases. If you want to make your case for or against certain races, hop in the comments. I'm curious, and I also take all this input seriously because I believe it's important to get this stuff right, even though in the end it's just a little gimmick. It's a list that I created, that I curate and assembled. And nevertheless, if you take gravel as a sport seriously, and more brands do, more and more racers do, more and more fans do, we need some type of orientation, what really matters out there. And ideally it matters for the right reasons. And that is why I invested a fair amount of thought and time and work into this list, and will do so in the future. Now, with that out of the way, let's jump into the Chase Wark documentary. I'm Thomas, and you're listening to the Gracing Podcast, where today we are going to talk about a different subject, not exactly recapping a race, but we are going to talk about gravel content, the relevance of content for gravel pros. Specifically, we are going to talk about a documentary that may very well already have come to your attention. I'm talking about the Chase Wark documentary. And to that end, I'm very happy that I'm once again joined by Chase himself. Hey, man, great that you're making the time this early morning for you.
Thanks for having me. It's not too early, actually. It's 8 a.m. is not too bad.
But you told me before that you came to bed only at like 1 a.m., so you didn't get enough sleep.
Yeah, that's okay.
And you probably heard a second voice in the background there, because we are not alone. We are also, or I'm very happy that JP, John Peter, aka, or probably even better known as the Stable Cyclist, is here as well. Hey man, good to have you.
Yeah, man, this is roles reversed. You were on my show in May, and now I'm here.
Yes, indeed. And well, I just managed, as I wrote you on Instagram a few days ago to watch the second episode of the Chase Wark documentary, and I'd be curious to learn from the two of you a bit more about the creative vision behind the project, because there is now this year a lot of gravel content, a lot more privateers started their own shows on YouTube, vlogging style. We have Russell Finsterwald's documentary. We have Payson doing more video formats of the interview variety, and we have the Avery and help me out. I'm blanking on the name, but you
Alexi.
yeah, Avery and Alexi thing, plus the Alexi and Keegan thing. So a lot more content out there. But I still think that you hit a distinct tone and language. So probably Chase, as you're the main star of the show, what was your vision when you kickstarted this endeavor?
Yeah, so anyone who follows me on Instagram kind of knows that I ride the trainer a lot in the winter, which means I'm watching a lot of YouTube, and I actually watch a lot of like triathlon and running content, and there's way more of that content than like gravel or cycling content. So that kind of inspired me to want to start putting out YouTube videos. But I'm also like I don't have video recording skills or editing skills. So JP and I got to talking probably when I did my 40-hour trainer week. And from there, and Lauf, in my contract, I put in the contract is put out several videos throughout the season. So I was like, okay, I need help with this, JP. And then
that was in the contract. That's an interesting detail, because I want to go into these aspects a bit later as well. But that was in the contract. They presented you. It was nothing that you had to negotiate.
I came to them saying, I'm going to put out 6 videos, and JP and I are working together on, 5 now, but I will have like probably 2 vlog style videos where they're not of the highest quality like we're putting out right now. But I knew I'm a person who, if I just say or if something's like written down that I have to do, I'm going to do it. Where if I just went and randomly, if I just was like, oh, I want to do this, but it wasn't like a need, I probably would skip it and not end up doing it. So since it's in the contract, it's like, okay, I have to do this, which is a good thing. And then, now, we started at the biggest gravel race in the world, or at least in the US. I don't know how Europeans feel about Unbound. And
I think it's the biggest in the world for the time being, at least.
Yeah. So we wanted to kick the series off there. It's kind of easier for JP to make it to the summer races because he has teaching in the spring. He has summers off since he's a teacher. So started off there. If Unbound is in a video title, it's going to get clicks. And then now we're covering some of the more smaller races before we cover Gravel Worlds, the one in Lincoln, Nebraska, later in the summer.
The original one.
Yeah, the original one.
I'm just, by the way, for everybody listening, you most likely came across the topic of the monuments of gravel, and I'm basically interrupting my writing process of writing the newsletter with the final 2025 list of the gravel monuments, and so that is really top of mind. But okay, so you have this idea of doing more video. You approach Lauf, your bike sponsor, and say, look, put it in the contract, I want to do it. And then once that is all clear, you're approaching JP over there. Now, at this point, when Chase comes to you, what are your thoughts, and how do you take on a project such as this? And probably when you answer this, also give the people who may not know you already from all the content you do a bit of an idea what your background in cycling, but also as a filmmaker is.
Yeah, I've been, I guess I would be considered like a gravel dad as far as my cycling goes, but I have been doing content in this space for a few years now. There's a mountain bike series based around the Mahahe 100 race, and we're 2 films into that. And those are feature length films that really focus on not only telling the story of the race, but telling the story of the people in it. And I obviously, if people aren't familiar, I host a podcast where we talk about bikes, life mentality, and mental health. And that kind of skews a lot of stories differently than maybe what we're hearing. We don't talk about watts or tires or any of that stuff. And as Chase and I got to be friends over the last year, he's a guy from my state that was nearby, and we did a couple in-person interviews, and I saw that he was really good with family because my son was with me on one of the trips, and we kind of a lot earlier than your 40-mile or 40-hour week, we started to just kind of kick around this idea and waiting to see if sponsors would be interested in doing something. So, and there were some different creative things we had talked about, but ultimately I kind of told Chase, look, if we're going to do this, I don't tell stories in the way of like, here's the minutia of how the race broke down. We obviously have to tell the story of the race, but we're going to teach them a lot more about who you are, because ultimately I think the people who are going to watch this, the gravel dads, especially like you and me, Thomas, we're going to relate a lot more to the human pieces of this. And so that's kind of where we started with the planning of it. And then it was, my schedule's pretty tight because of teaching during the school year. And how do we fit races in that fit with me being able to go to them?
But the interesting, I mean, you mentioned many interesting points, and we will get to several of them. But for now, let's stay with the show and the planning, and especially the human element and the storytelling. That I would say it's much more a show about Chase or a documentary about Chase than it is about bike racing specifically. Even though, of course, that is like the theme in there, but people who know Chase probably mostly know Chase for his aero builds and his other tech stuff. And while actually in the Unbound video, I think you found a pretty good way to address this, so it still plays a role, but it's definitely not a video about an aero build and how you came up with it and how many watts you save with this component or that component, but it's much more embedded in a larger narrative about Chase the person. And it seems like for you that was pretty clear from the beginning, JP, that you wanted to do this. Chase, when he told you, look, that is how I want to do it, what was your thinking about it? Was that like challenging in some way, because it suddenly means you have to talk about stuff that you probably don't usually talk about and open up more to the audience? Was that like difficult? Did you argue with him about that, or?
No, I wanted to share my stories, or like everything that I'm involved in the cycling world, because I think it's easier to find a race recap vlog of, here's me pre-riding the course, here's me mixing my bottles and my fueling strategy, and then here's how the race played out. And now here's me eating a Chipotle burrito after the race. I think that footage, like, great for people who put it out. And like, at some point, I don't have 100 different personalities that we can make videos about. So we will at some point have to start putting out videos like that, and maybe have Drew Dillman in there, so there's even more personality. But yeah, I really love the idea of like, okay, let's tell my story of like being an aero dork. I guess I can like this next one that's coming out is me being an event director and me being a gravel dad, because I'm one of the few pros, I think, that doesn't just race a bike for a living. I have a kid, and there's only like 3 other gravel professionals that are fathers, and maybe there's more, and then there's no other gravel pro that puts on bike races. So let's share that story. And obviously, like, the aero dork stuff, like, that is what I'm known for in the gravel scene. So let's share that story and kind of why I do that instead of just people making assumptions online. So I really loved the idea, and I love how it's playing out, and hopefully more people. I want to be a relatable gravel professional. Like, it's hard for the average gravel rider to look at like, oh yep, there's a video of Russell doing 400 watts and winning BWR, and wow, he drinks so much, I don't know, flow formulas or what, like, yeah. So it's
a second, who knows what.
Never second. So it's I want to put out more relatable content that also tells a story. And I think having JP there to ask me the questions that are going to get the answers, to share my story, it's been amazing so far.
So take us a bit behind the scenes and tell us how the production process actually looks like, JP, when you're like doing a trip to Emporia, Kansas to shoot at Unbound, or I think it was called Lutsen. Or is it the place only of the race or also the location? I actually didn't check the location name.
Both, yeah.
Both, yeah. So how does a weekend like this go for you specifically in terms of preparation, production, and so on?
Yeah. Well, and I want to say one more thing to what we were just talking about
Sure.
How we kind of what we're doing. I said to Chase, I'm like, Lauf is investing a lot of money in this, and I'm like, I work with brands too, right? And I know what those brands want out of things. And when you go and film a race, a lot can go wrong. And so we had talked ahead of time about what are the things we can make this about so that if the race goes completely sideways, we still have a story. And I was really glad we did that at Unbound, because otherwise it would have been like, well, the race didn't go well and we have not a lot of footage because of it. And so, but because we came in with this other idea of like, there's this other story that we have to tell, and then whatever happens in the race is just fun.
Yeah.
That made things a lot easier, and it has made things a lot easier and a lot less high pressure when we're out shooting. And so to get to like, what does a weekend look like for me? We usually roll in a day or two early. We'll try and go film pre-interviews with Chase. If there's other people we know need to be involved, we'll try and grab those on the front. But a lot of times those interviews have happened after the fact, and then shoot just some B-roll. And then race day is so chaotic always. And it starts whenever Chase wakes up, and we basically follow him around. And at Unbound, I had another cameraman with me, coworker who works with me a lot, and I trust him, and so I could just bring him with. And at Lutsen, I was totally on my own, and so I had to hand a camera to somebody I kind of knew and said, when he comes by, hit the record button for me. And then this past weekend where we were at in Mandan or in Bismarck, I had a driver that the race organization had arranged for me, because they, now that a couple races have seen, or we've done a couple of these races, are like, oh, this is really good if they show up and do a video about us. And so we're going to help. And I had a contact at that race as well. So they had a driver for us, which simplifies my life a lot. My son actually traveled with me, and he did quite a bit of camera work for me as well, helping out, and had a lot of fun. And he really looks up to Chase. So it was just a really fun weekend too. But it's full on. It is so full on. And then there hits a point on race day, probably about 4 or 5 p.m., where I'm just like, oh my word, I need to go just lay down because I'm so exhausted and I didn't even race. So, and then it's immediately back into backing everything up last night when we got home, and kind of having the plan for how this is going to get done by Friday.
Okay, that's a quick turnover then, huh?
Yeah.
And are you doing all the editing yourself?
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess busy days ahead. I mean, one specific topic that I wondered about is, like, obviously, especially at a race like Unbound, which must be pretty high on your priority list, Chase, how do you balance this kind of tension between, on the one hand side, you want to get great footage and be there getting all the footage, but also you want to give Chase as an athlete the space he needs to prepare, to recover for the race. How do you balance this, or do you just not balance it and you just shoot all the time, JP?
I try to be... There's a problem with having too much footage. And so I'm usually worried about that more than being worried about, am I in Chase's space too much? Because he's pretty... I mean, I feel like you're pretty comfortable with me, Chase, at this point.
Yeah.
And sometimes... Yeah, I only shoot what I need, or what I think I'm going to need. And it really helps now, again, that we've done a couple, but also that we have the story coming in. So I'm like, this is specific to the story. Unbound was tough because we were doing the Aero Dork thing. So every time we went to a expo and he was there with the bike, I knew Cycling News might show up, Ben Delaney might show up, all these people might show up, that, like, it's important to show how visible Chase was. So then I have to be shooting that. This past weekend, I hardly had the camera out other than the race proper, because I had previously shot all of this stuff at one of the races that Chase was directing. And that's where a lot of this story is about. And then obviously we filmed the whole race, but yeah, I don't know. Have you felt like it's intrusive, Chase, or am I just there?
I just feel like you're there with a camera. You're not, like, making me do anything different, or I don't know. And if you want to, like, ask about balance, like, I mean, Unbound was not balanced at all for me, but I don't feel like that's because JP was following me. It was because I'm balancing way too many things at my most important bike race of the year. So, yeah. And least of which was telling JP what he should and shouldn't be filming. Like, I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I just let JP do his thing because he knows what to do. And if I do feel like something is important, I'll let him know. But since he's kind of by me most of the time, it's easy for him to get footage whenever.
So as you already alluded to, your Unbound ended with you not finishing the race, and that is something told in the first episode of the documentary. And then in the second episode, one narrative there is, and it's visualized by some social media comments, that you picked, I guess, JP and put on the screen of people criticizing you for the fact that you didn't finish the race. And then I think there was one comment that and I'm paraphrasing here, was like, you could have at least said you had a mechanical or a crash or something, and if it DNF for that reason. But was that more or less something you took the two comments that existed and created this storyline for the show for good television, or Chase, was there like real proper criticism of you for DNFing at Unbound?
I mean, I think, there was several comments saying like you should finish the race, blah blah blah. And I think we wanted to share that like my sponsor doesn't care if I end up finishing the race and getting 70th place. And also why, if I'm having a mental battle out there, why go dig myself into this like big hole mentally and physically that I would have to get myself out of, when pulling the plug is just the safer thing to do. Because for me, my sponsors were already happy with all the content that was created before, and obviously the video. So for me, it's like, I don't care if I get 70th place at Unbound, and like, I know I can ride.
Sponsor.
Yeah, I know I can ride 200 miles. So it's not. Yeah, I wanted to go out there and try to win or get a very good result.
You're past the point of like a normie like me, for instance. Probably I would like to finish the 200 miles just to finish them, but that is obviously not where you are in terms of bike riding. And look, I guess we cannot be surprised by anything that is put out on the internet by a random person in the comments, but still it strikes me as a bit of a silly pushback to not finishing, especially like in your situation, the race not going well. And then I think you allude to the point that you were thinking about your family, and you at this point relatively newborn kid. So whatever, but people will criticize on the internet, and that is how it goes. And likewise, I assume that once you put out stuff, you are also kind of prepared for that to happen, especially if you share your own story. So I hope that like mentally it wasn't too tough for you, Chase, to read these comments.
No, I kind of laugh at them, and I'm like, this person is dumb. Like, they don't understand why I am sponsored by sponsors. Like,
definitely. I mean, at least naive, and then probably dumb, just because like they then put it in writing on the internet, just for it doesn't make the world better in any aspect. But so what's actually really interesting to me is the topic of how all this filmmaking plays a role in your personal brand and essentially your livelihood as a gravel pro and privateer. And so we already talked about the fact that Lauf is the main sponsor that makes it possible with their financial contribution. Let's start probably here. When you start pitching this, that you want to do this type of project, what is the initial reaction of the people at Lauf, and in how far do you actually talk about the concept and the creative with them?
So I pitched the idea to Lauf, and so I just said 6 videos, and they thought that was a great idea, just because there's not much video content in the gravel scene that's like vlog and anything to show off racer. Like, you have Joe Gettle and Drew Dillman doing in-race footage and a little bit more vlog style this year. And at this time, Russell didn't have anything out, and like Lance Haydet didn't have much. It was like Alexi really kind of only doing, here's kind of what a general race weekend looks like. So like Lauf allows me a lot of, they didn't have any like input. They're like, we know whatever you want to do, go and do that. And that's even like with my race bike setup. They're like, whatever you want to do to your bike, go ahead. Like, there's no, Chase, you have to show off big mountain bike tires at every single race and how good the clearance is on this bike. It's like, if you want to run road tires on your Laufsegle, I could do that. So I have, Lauf, it's great to work with them in every sense because they just let me do whatever I want to do and they're not holding me back in any way. And they're just super supportive of, bike racing and this video production.
A second thing that you already mentioned is your sponsors don't really care about like a top 70 finish or a DNF. The value that you generate comes from different topics. I assume that your bike and your entire setup was the most prominent now for the second year in a row of all the bikes at Unbound. So that definitely created a huge amount of visibility. So job well done there. Can you in some sense quantify or at least guess what the contribution to your value as a gravel pro athlete of a docuseries like the one you're working on is, especially compared to the results that you achieve?
Yeah, I haven't really thought about like how how to quantify or how quantifying it is to be putting this stuff out. But I do really think it's working because when people hear me, since we're putting out content that makes, at least with these videos, obviously putting a disc wheel on a gravel bike is not relatable in any sense, but like with these videos, it makes me hopefully a more relatable gravel racer to the average person. So then when they hear me talk about my bike or, how affordable a Lauf is or how it has the most tire clearance out of any gravel bike, they take that more to heart than, one of the top finishers when they just say something about their bike. Hopefully, since I'm more relatable, they trust what I'm saying more than every pro is going to talk about how great their bike is. Yeah. But if I'm the most relatable and I can say like, here is why an average person should buy a Lauf instead of XYZ bike, hopefully they're like, oh yeah, like this guy, is making good points. And
I get the thought process, and I would even go like one step further because my hunch is, and to an extent, the experiences or conversations you have with your sponsors that you described earlier also verify this, is that probably the value of a athlete / personality like yourself, who on the one hand side has like this strong positioning as an aero dog, but you are also willing to put yourself and your personality, your story out there, is probably higher for a brand than working with somebody who is like top 5 at Unbound. I mean, the winner, obviously, that's a different level of publicity you get from it, but otherwise, as you say, probably you got one of the highest mind shares from all people at Unbound thanks to your bike, and that is worth something to brands. And last time we spoke, which was at the beginning of the season, before, I think it was after Valley of Tears, if I remember correctly, then you were also talking about the fact that this year of racing with the kid coming is also in a sense decisive for you and your career going forward, because you at that point at least didn't have any kind of security for the next year.
Mhm.
And do you think that a project like this is paying its dividends in that sense, like creating job security for you as a gravel privateer?
Yeah, so actually on the car ride, so I have not started any contract talk with any of my sponsors for next year. JP told me that's on my to-do list on Monday. But I believe strongly that it should help with job security, because I think it's making me stand out. And this is just like a selfish view. I think it's making me stand out and more unique than almost every other professional gravel racer out there. So I wouldn't see why it would hurt me. Maybe they don't want to sponsor someone who's open and relatable. That's cool, I guess. But yeah, I think it should help. Hopefully, I think every conversation that I have with all of my sponsors, they all love what I'm doing. So I think it should be, hopefully I can re-sign with everybody. And then, I'm also hoping to add a few sponsors, and I want some of the brands to come more on board with the 4 gravel races that I'm putting on. So hopefully this event directing video that's going to come out soon, hopefully they see that and they just want to come on board and for my events as well and support grassroots gravel racing, because I think that's where gravel racing focus should be at. You get more bang for your buck sponsoring a local gravel race than spending thousands of dollars to set up a tent at Onbound.
Yeah, that's potentially true, and I definitely agree with your suspicion that all this should be very attractive to many brands. Maybe not all, but it's definitely if you can bring the eyeballs, which also is, by the way, one of the criticisms that I have of how gravel is currently structured, because it's not really sustainable for new kids. Even we talked about it back in our first podcast together, and that is where something like teams could help. And that actually is a great segue to Matchbox. Back when we then talked, I think you had just announced your team that you started with Drew Dillman, and I'd be curious to hear from you what's after the first half season as a team owner. What's your resume so far?
Our resume is Drew hasn't won a single bike race, and I've won a few.
Oh, yeah, that's.
But no,
maybe that's a lost in translation error.
No,
what's your takeaway from the first half of the season?
Yeah,
is what I'm after.
I think I wish Drew, my honest take is I wish Drew and I were at more races together, because we started the season out together, and I think we had a really good start of the team launch at BWR Arizona, and we got some good content put out there. And then since we don't live in the same state, and in the gravel scene, there's a lot of races in March, and then there's a few races again in April. But since I had a kid in April, I wasn't able to make it out to Sea Otter or BWR California, where we could have made more content. And then May, there's nothing really. And then there's Onbound which we were together, and I have content saved up on my phone from that. I just haven't gotten around to like making reels of us together. So I think it's been a good start so far. And I think the second half of the year, starting at Gravel Worlds, we have a lot of races together, and Drew's actually going to be at my house for like we're going to be together for 10 days in a row. So I think the second half of this season will end on a high note, and we plan on having Lunchbox continue into next season. And I would like to add a woman onto the roster. I don't know if it's possible at all, but that's kind of one of my goals. And then one thing Drew and I have been talking about as well is taking our coaching businesses. So he has Ignition and I have Wark's cycling services, and I guess my event promotion business as well, and starting a U23 branch off of Lunchbox and trying to give not the most talented kids chance at like, this is what it's like to be a gravel privateer. More, I want to recruit or give opportunities to those like either juniors or U23 riders that come from maybe a smaller town and they're working really hard at trying to become a gravel professional. But since they're not from Boulder, Colorado, they don't have this like red carpet laid out in front of them, and they kind of have to, work extra hard to try to get to the exact same spot as someone from, Colorado, Utah, California would have to, which is, I want
one of the places that comes with a good network. And once you're in this network, it's basically the privilege of being born in one of the good places. And these are the good places in terms of bike racing, and then others are not. But that sounds like a pretty cool plan. And kudos to you if that works. I think exactly one of the spots in gravel where if we want to make this sustainable, we need pathways for young people to get into the sport and become and just race. And we all know that is very expensive. And if you provide a solution, that's perfect. So JP, you already dropped the word that is also on my notes for this show and topics I want to talk about, namely gravel debts, which I guess we need to pay dues at this point to the Holy Spirit of gravel, who really phrased that or turned that term into a thing. And we are gravel debts for sure. I have 2 kids, and I forgot the exact number, but I recall that you have a lot of kids.
Yeah.
How many? 4 or 5?
5. I have 5 kids. Yeah.
Yeah. So that qualifies you, I think, in this round here as the top gravel dad. And Chase, you actually joined the club. So let's start maybe with you. How are the dad wads becoming?
I think that Lutsen was my best ever performance on a bike. So I think the dad watts are coming along. I also need to note that I did not it took me a very long time to recover from Lutsen because I had a lot of dad duties the next week. So dad watts are up, dad recovery is down, but I think that it's worth it.
Yeah, that is for sure. So are there any kind of major changes that you by now implemented into your routine? I assume many of my listeners here also are gravel dads, and some others may turn into gravel dads. So at some point, that is a very relatable topic, of course, even though your routine as a pro is certainly different from most of us, but still maybe you figured out some good ideas to be a good dad and a bike racer. What are the major changes so far?
Yeah, so you mentioned the word routine, and that does not exist in my life right now. So I would say one thing I've learned is just like every day is going to be different, and it's not probably going to go to plan. So my ideal day my ideal training day is like wake up, eat a bowl of Frosted Flakes, get on the bike around 8 or 9 o'clock, and then try to be home by 1 or 2. But maybe you can hear him in the background. Some mornings are a little bit more difficult around the house, and my wife is super supportive of me being a bike racer, so I want to be super supportive with helping take care of our baby. So some mornings I'm like, okay, you can go do whatever you want, and I'll watch the kid, and if he needs food, I'll let you know. But if she needs extra sleep, I will help her with that. If she needs to just make any phone calls or whatever, I want to be super supportive of her. So some days I still am able to get out at 9 a.m. because the morning's going really well. Other days I've been starting at noon in like the heat of the day. So yeah, the routine is just be supportive. And I guess the one thing we do daily is like bath time with the kid. So I think that's been good. We've also been on the road for almost a month now. So it's been really hard to have any structure to the day. I think I've stayed in like 5 or 6 different locations in the past month. So I'm like very fortunate to be able to live this life where we can come up to Abigail's parents for a week and then go visit my parents for a week. And then we were going to go camping with Abigail's parents, but since it's really smoky in the area right now, we're staying in a house just so we don't have to breathe in really bad air. But that also comes at a cost of we don't really have a day-to-day routine besides bath time at like 7 o'clock.
JP, to bring you in more from the normie non-pro perspective, with like 5 kids, were there phases where you essentially had to stop riding, or did you manage in all these years to stay on the bike at least for a bit?
That's complicated. I have a outstanding, amazing wife, and she stay-at-home mom and really supportive. But I also had these major mental health interruptions. So usually I would train. Over the last 10 years, there's been real sporadic times where I would train and then not train. And basically since 2020, I've kind of gotten my hands around it more. But yeah, it became about, once I had kids, it really became about how do I structure my day in a way to find that time. And so it became a lot more of training at night or training early in the morning, and just how I think a lot of people have to do it versus knocking it out in the afternoon. And of course, like my life is a little different as a teacher because I have my summers off. Mm-hmm. And so right now, as I'm prepping for some races, it's midday training, like what Chase was talking about. And I do the family stuff in the morning, and my kids are all a little bit further along in years and more self-sufficient now. And so I don't
I assume that helps a lot.
It helps tremendously. And it helps
once they are past the point that that they need to be watched all the time.
Yeah, and it helps tremendously when the oldest ones can start to drive and help out with that. And so,
nice.
because there's definitely a 2-year window a few years back where I felt like an Uber driver every day, because it felt like that's all I was doing, is just shuttling kids around. And now the older ones kind of help out. And yeah.
I think in the US that's with 16 still, right?
Yes.
So that's helpful, because over here you need to be 18. I think there is now a thing like that you can actually start driving with the 17, but then a parent still needs to be in the car all the time. So
Sure.
yeah, no, I'm far away from this, but yeah, it's it definitely changes things. But on my side, I did, like, when I started riding gravel, the first one, I think he was already born or just on the way. So essentially, I didn't have a time since my teenage years when I rode that I have been riding but didn't have a kid. So essentially, I don't know anything else but being a gravel dad.
Sure.
Is what I'm saying. Any other tips or tricks in like the daily routine that you can share with our like-minded gravel dad listeners? Because to me, like you say, evening or night riding definitely was one of them, especially on the trainer. And then also in the summer, like when they were super small and they needed attention, then what I did a lot, especially on Sundays for like the long endurance type of ride, I had an e-bike with a trailer and I put the kids in the trailer, and then I did the endurance ride just on the e-bike with the kids attached to it. And that was super nice, because then they fell asleep or enjoyed the scenery. I could ride for a few hours, and that was very family compatible.
Yeah, for me, embrace the trainer is a big one. And also, if you are in a place where you can ride outside at night, find some good lights and just learn to do it. Because there was, when I would say like 7 or 8 years ago, there was a stretch where for almost a year I only rode at night, because that's when I had free time. And you learn to be outside and in the dark, and you can get a lot done. And once the kids got to bed, I'd hop on, throw the kid on and head out the door and get home when I got home. But it's being organized, and a lot of times making your bottles. It's amazing how long making your bottles takes. So if you have some downtime for 15 minutes during the middle of the day, make your bottles and throw them in the fridge. And it's one less thing to worry about. But all those 15-minute tasks pre-ride, they stack up in a hurry when you're tight on time. And so if you can have those things done, it makes life a lot easier.
So let's end a bit where we began, talking about gravel content. And Chase, for me, the final question that I have for you is, like, once this season of content and your contractual obligations are fulfilled, do you want to continue being a YouTube gravel star? And if so, do you already have some ideas for where you want to take us in the next season?
Yeah, so I want to continue building my YouTube channel. I think it's the best way to connect with people, or to have people learn more about you. So yeah, even if it's not in any of my contracts, as long as I have the budget, I will keep having. And if JP is willing to hang out with me more, I want to keep putting out content. And we do have some ideas. I will say I am a person who may not come up with the best ideas, but I am really good at finding ideas to imitate or copy, not from the gravel biking scene. So, if someone else watches a whole bunch of running videos, they'll be like, this video seems really familiar from this YouTube personality. So, obviously.
But that's how creativity goes, no? Like in the end, creativity
there are no new ideas.
Yeah, it's always like discovering stuff in one domain and translating it to this. People just call it inspiration. You got inspiration.
Yeah, I should say I'm very inspired by, I think in America, at least, or maybe it's just me, but like Lionel Sanders is a big name in the triathlon scene because he has, over 100,000 YouTube subscribers. And all of his content he puts out is sometimes it's just him rambling about how training is going. And so, we have.
Okay. I'm super not into that world, so I know nothing. But I think even I have heard the name before. At least I think I've never watched one of his YouTube videos. That's for sure. So JP, looking at the gravel content space with a professional eye as a filmmaker, where do you see white spots if you want to share what you're missing? But I'm curious because I always like to look at a place and see what's missing. What could people do? Do you have something?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've never been super big on innovation and trying to like come up with the next thing. I've always, and this is as long as I've been doing filmmaking, I'm like, we're just going to tell people stories because that's the most relatable thing. And whatever that looks like, we're going to tell it. And so I think as we look, and this was a huge part. You should have been in the car yesterday or the truck on the way home, Thomas, because this was a huge discussion. I would say for a couple hours where we were just discussing what does next year look like? What does that process look like? And we said, it'll evolve, but ultimately it'll still be centered around stories and human stories, because that's the thing. Even at this race we were at yesterday, we get people coming up to us, and it is a lot of gravel dads, and it is a lot of guys in their 40s and 50s that get a little teary-eyed when they talk to us about, you're making really relatable stuff to my life. And this is a 27-year-old gravel pro that we're talking about who is relating to their life because he's being open about being a parent, or he's being open about how hard it is to go out and ride his bike and be away from his family. And everybody can relate to that, right? And so for me, it's always just, I'm never sitting here thinking like, how can I innovate? That's not how my brain works. I think there's other people who are amazing at that. I'm always just like, what's the story we can tell that's the most human, that'll connect with the most people? That then, there's some benefits of now they look at a Lauf bike and maybe like it better. But ultimately, if they're going through it at home or they're going through it in a different way, they are like, I feel not alone in how I feel now. And that's really important to what I do. And I know it's why Chase and I connected the very first time we met. People know if I come around and I hang out with you, and you see it on my podcast, Thomas, a lot of people will be in tears within about an hour of hanging out with me because I just keep like digging into the story. And the first time I ever met Chase, within an hour, like he was sitting across from me on a couch crying about how life was going. And so there's always that ability to like, let's tell stories and relate, because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to grind through life and find some joy and hope in it. So.
And then finding very good characters to portray, such as Chase, definitely helps with the job, right?
100%. Yes. You have to have willing participants.
Yeah, that's for sure. Guys, it was great to have you on. Thanks a lot for your time from my end. Are there any final last words or famous last words that you want to share with our audience? If not, then plug your stuff at least, and where people can find you, your work, and the documentary, of course.
On Instagram, it's Chase the Biker. And then on YouTube, I should probably change it to Chase the Biker on YouTube also, but it's just Chase Wark right now. And then, yeah, we have 2 videos out so far, and the third will be coming out probably around the time this podcast is out. So go check those out, and yeah, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and yeah. No famous last. Oh, go ahead.
You can find all my stuff across the board is the Stable Cyclist, and there's a weekly podcast on there where I talk to people. You can go back in the May archives where we did the Gravel Gospel series and listen to Thomas's full length interview. And there's a lot of stuff with Chase as well. And then the Matahe film series is all on the YouTube channel, also the Stable Cyclist. And soon there will be, if you want less serious content, there's a series on there called the Bootleg Miles, where you kind of come with me racing throughout the year. And I go to so far I've gone to 2 out of the 2 races that Chase puts on and talked about those. So yeah, that's where you can find all the good stuff for both of us.